Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's TACO again. TACO stands for Trump Always Chickens Out, TACO. And he's done it with Greenland. After all the bluster, he's backed down. He won't slap tariffs on European countries and he won't use military force. Then what's the plan, assuming there is one? And what will Europe do? They're at a crossroads. Will they reset with the US or de-risk from it? A meeting in Brussels tonight may give us the answer. Meanwhile, in Davos, India takes center stage. As global power bloc shift, New Delhi is offering scale and stability. But to make the most of it, India must fix some things at home. For instance, pollution. It's a bigger threat than tariffs, and at this rate, it will hurt the Indian economy. It's already killing Indian people, by the way. Also in Davos, Trump unveils a board of peace. We'll tell you who has joined. Also on the show, is China rethinking its Africa strategy? More exports, fewer loans. Why Bangladesh is pulling out of the World Cup, the T20 World Cup. Why it's a double whammy to them. What is the battle for space internet? Jeff Bezos announces arrival to Elon Musk's Starlink. Is Indonesia's currency crisis linked to the president's nephew? And Syria agrees to a new truce with the Kurds. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. French President Emmanuel Macron says his navy boarded a tanker belonging to Russia in the Mediterranean Sea. The vessel was suspected of flying a false flag. Paris says the operation was carried out with the help of its allies and the tanker has now been diverted. Iran warns Donald Trump against miscalculations. The commander of its Revolutionary Guard says that they have their, and I'm quoting, they have their finger on the trigger. While Trump has claimed that the Islamic Republic is interested in talks, he hasn't ruled out military action against Tehran. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar meets European Union ambassadors, emphasizes on how stronger India-EU ties would de-risk the world economy. This comes ahead of a visit by the bloc's top leaders to India. They will be attending the Republic Day celebrations on Monday and hold the India-EU summit with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Colombia and Ecuador spark a trade war, announced dueling tariffs on energy imports. This follows a dispute between the South American neighbors over drug trafficking along their shared border. Both countries have imposed 30% tariffs on each other. Bogota has also suspended electricity sales to Quito. And a commuter train hits a crane in southeastern Spain. Several people have been injured in this incident. This is the fourth train accident in the country within a week. Last Sunday, 43 people died in Spain's worst rail disaster in more than a decade.
We have a very good relationship.
If Donald Trump was a DJ, he would be a bad one. I'm sure you know what a good DJ does. They build up the vibe, they build up the beats and the expectations, and finally comes the beat drop. But with Trump, that never happens. He raises tensions only to back out in the end. We saw it first with the tariffs. He announced them, but he kept delaying the implementation. Experts called it the TACO trend. Trump always chickens out. That's TACO. And it seems he's done it again with Greenland. Yesterday in Davos, he was very firm. Trump repeatedly claimed that he must have the island.
I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it, as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them.
To that end, He had threatened tariffs. 10% tariffs on 8 European countries. If they give up Greenland, no tariffs. If they push back, 10% extra tariffs from the 1st of February. That was the threat. But now Trump has had a change of mind. Yesterday, he met NATO chief Mark Rutte, and afterwards he posted this message on social media. I'm quoting, "We have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and the entire Arctic region. This solution will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st. So the tariffs are off. The question is why? Is it because he realized that Europe will not give in, or is it because Europe actually did give in? Let's focus on this framework that he talks about. There is no official document or statement yet. All we have are clues as to what this framework could be. The NATO chief has given us one clue. He says the framework involves strengthening Arctic security.
Yesterday, we came to this understanding that collectively as NATO, we have to step up here, including the US. Now, of course, our military will start the planning, but that is something which we are good at. But the most important thing is not the internal decision making. It is that we protect the Arctic region, implementing the President's vision that we need a safe Arctic region.
So Arctic security is on the table. But what about Greenland? The NATO chief says Greenland's sovereignty was not discussed. They also did not discuss mining or security issues on the island.
Is it still under the Kingdom of Denmark in this framework deal?
That issue did not come up anymore in my conversations tonight with the President. We very much focused on what do we need to do to make sure that that huge Arctic region, where change is taking place at the moment.
So he says Greenland was not discussed, but here's the problem. US media reports say that Greenland was indeed discussed and that the NATO chief made a proposal to Trump. It has three main aspects. Number one, updating the existing US-Denmark agreement. This would increase American presence on Greenland, basically more bases and more soldiers. Number two, increasing NATO activity in the Arctic, not just security activities, but also financial ones like mining. And finally, number three, the US can position its Golden Dome on Greenland. We've told you about the Golden Dome before. It is Donald Trump's proposed air defense system. He claims it can shoot down even ballistic and hypersonic missiles. Now, this is the proposal that the NATO chief is said to have made. Under this deal, Greenland will not change hands. It will remain with the Danish kingdom. But is that okay with Donald Trump? A reporter asked him about Greenland's ownership. Surprisingly, he evaded the question.
We'll have everything we want. We're getting everything we want at no cost.
So what are we talking about? An acquisition of Greenland? Are you going to pay for it?
We're talking about it. It's really being negotiated now, the details of it, but essentially it's total access. It's there's no end. There's no time limit.
Just hours ago, he said he wanted Greenland. He must have it. But after the talks, he's talking about access. And what about the other party? Denmark is treading with caution. Their defense minister says NATO cannot negotiate an agreement for Denmark. Only Denmark and Greenland can do that. And that seems like a fair point. The same NATO complains when the US and Russia talk without Ukraine, but they themselves discuss Greenland without Denmark. Just classic Western double standards. But hypocrisy aside, let's focus on the big question here. Is the Greenland crisis over? Well, the next few days are crucial. Let's see if the so-called framework is published and also whether it's acceptable to both parties. And even if that happens, this would be a classic case of taco because these concessions are not new. The US is already free to have bases on Greenland. Denmark was open to allowing US companies to mine there. They also had signaled willingness to help the Golden Dome. So right now, this so-called framework does not look like a new deal. It looks like an instrument of appeasement, something designed to give Donald Trump a sense of victory. Yes, it may settle the tensions for now, but it does embolden Trump further. It unleashes a new wave of American imperialism. Look at what happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday. A group of Republican lawmakers got together at the Kennedy Center. They cut a cake shaped like Greenland. And look at the colors. Greenland is shown with the American flag. As long as these stunts do not stop, Greenland will not feel safe. Yesterday, their government unveiled crisis guidelines. Basically, what should you do during a crisis? Things like stockpiling food, water, and hunting rifles. Greenland's government says they don't expect to use this guideline. Nonetheless, it's an insurance, a backup if the US invades. Now, we don't know if these tensions will rise or not, but as things stand, we can say one thing. Neither America nor Europe is coming out of this unscathed. It's not just a flashpoint, it's a rupture. The mood in Davos is a lot calmer today. Leaders came expecting tariffs and threats. Instead, they got another U-turn by US President Trump. At least for now, there is relief. And we are seeing that in global markets too. Most of them had fallen after Trump's tariff threats, but yesterday, after he called off those threats, the markets rebounded. In the US, the Dow Jones is around 0.6% up. The German markets are up 1%. The French markets are also up 1%. Meanwhile, the British markets are close to 0.2% in the green. So the markets are cheering the de-escalation, and it's obvious why. Trump had threatened 10% tariffs on 8 European nations: Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Finland, and Denmark, 8 countries. In response, the European Union was mulling retaliation. Maybe counter tariffs or even a crackdown on US firms. And this would have been a disastrous scenario. We're talking about 2 closely integrated economies, so a trade war between the European Union and the US would have been brutal. Thankfully, that's been avoided for now. And that's why the markets are cheering. But what about the political reaction? Germany's Chancellor was all praise for Trump's move. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also welcomed it.
It is good news that we are making steps into that right direction. I welcome President Trump's remarks from last night. This is the right way to go. This is the right way because any threat to acquire European territory by force would be unacceptable.
It is a good thing that yesterday the threat of tariffs against the United Kingdom was lifted, and now we can start the hard yards of finding a way forward on security in the Arctic.
Frankly, Europe is in a bit of a pickle. Yes, Trump has called off the tariffs, but this is only short-term relief. In the long term, Europe has to chart its own course. It has to reduce its dependence on the United States. If not, episodes like Greenland will keep popping up. Earlier this week, European leaders sounded firm about the idea. They talked about building a new Europe.
In my view, the seismic change we are going through today is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, to build a new form of European independence. And this need is neither new nor a reaction to recent events.
Europe has very strong tools now, and we have to use them when we are not respected and when the rules of the game are not respected, by the way.
We also saw some action. Yesterday, the European Parliament froze the US trade deal. The deal was sealed last year. The EU Parliament was in the process of approving it, but that's when Trump raked up Greenland. So the EU lawmakers decided to halt the approval process. Will they now resume the approval, or will they keep it frozen? We are yet to hear from European governments. Also, there's a crucial meeting today. A few hours from now, European leaders will gather in Brussels. It's an emergency meeting on Greenland and tariffs. The agenda is quite simple. How should Europe handle Trump? Now, this summit was called after the tariff threat. For the moment, that threat is no longer on the table, but Greenland will be discussed. Denmark is a member of the European Union. Chances are EU countries will rally behind what Denmark says. But the broader question is, will we see a long-term pivot from Europe? Will those bold claims in Davos reflect in actions in Brussels? There are two factors to watch out for. Number one, the war in Ukraine. That war is still on. Trump met President Zelensky on the sidelines of Davos today. He is sounding upbeat about a settlement. His special envoy claims the talks are down to one issue.
I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think we've got it down to one issue,
and we have discussed iterations of that issue, and that means it's solvable. So if both sides want to solve this, we're going to get it solved. That's my view.
Now, Europe is wary of these talks. They fear that Trump will impose a peace deal on Ukraine. So they cannot abandon the US overnight. Certainly not as long as the Ukraine war is on, because Kiev still needs American weapons. So that's the first factor. The second factor is quite the opposite. Trump's speech yesterday made one thing very, very clear. He hates Europe. Their immigration rules, their climate action policies, their tech regulations, he hates all of it.
Certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable. And we can argue about it, but there's no argument. And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good. But it's not heading in the right direction. There are windmills all over Europe. There are windmills all over the place. And they are losers. One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing. And those countries have to do their thing. They have to get out of the culture that they've created over the last 10 years. It's horrible what they're doing to themselves. They're destroying themselves. It's beautiful, beautiful places. Without us, right now, you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps.
There's 3 more years of that, maybe even more. Trump's politics will not disappear with him. Most Republican leaders are following his line on Europe, which means Brussels has to think long term. It's a classic political dilemma. In the short term, Europe needs America. In the long term, they must break free from America. It certainly promises to be a high-stakes summit in Brussels tonight. This is a time of global upheaval. Alliances are shifting, new power blocs are taking shape, and India is at the center of this realignment, especially given its growing partnership with Europe. Yesterday, Brussels made a major announcement. It will sign a new defense and security pact with New Delhi. Listen to this.
In a few days, the European Union and India will meet in New Delhi for the 16th EU-India summit. The EU and India are moving closer together at the time when the rules-based international order is under unprecedented pressure through wars, coercion and economic fragmentation. 2 major democracies cannot afford to hesitate. We must become more ambitious partners. Today we agreed to move forward with the signature of a new EU-India security and defence partnership in areas like maritime security, cybersecurity and counter-terrorism. In a more dangerous world, we will both gain from working closer together.
That announcement was made by Kaja Kallas. She is the European Union's top diplomat. She was addressing European parliamentarians in France. She said the pact will cover 3 key areas: maritime security, cybersecurity and counter-terrorism. The specifics will be shared next week when Kallas and her European colleagues visit New Delhi. As you know, Europe's top leadership will be the chief guests for India's Republic Day on Monday, and the agenda for the visit is extensive. It also includes a trade deal. The European Commission President spoke about it in Davos. That's Ursula von der Leyen. She called the agreement with India, the mother of all deals.
And right after Davos, the next weekend, I will travel to India. There's still work to do, but we are on the cusp of a historic trade agreement. Indeed, some call it the mother of all deals. One that would create a market of 2 billion people, accounting for almost a quarter of global GDP. And crucially, that would provide a first-mover advantage for Europe with one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic continents.
This is largely the sentiment in Davos, where political and business leaders from around the world have gathered. They're seeking greater alignment with India because amid the global storm unleashed by Donald Trump, India is one of the few countries that can still offer scale, stability, and strategic depth. When the world's biggest banks, in fact, even the world's biggest banks have noticed this churn, like JP Morgan. It is America's largest bank. Its CEO, Jamie Dimon, is one of the most influential voices in global finance. Yesterday, he said the world order is changing and that change may not favor the United States. Dimon was discussing the speech of Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister. We told you about the speech yesterday. It's going viral because Carney made a scathing assessment of the West led by Donald Trump. He said it will cause a rupture in the world order. In fact, he called the rules-based order a lie. Honestly, it was odd coming from the leader of a country that has benefited from the same order. They were America's closest allies. They fought American wars and they safeguarded American interests. But now that system is not working for them, so they're making these sanctimonious admissions. Nonetheless, what he said struck a chord, and Jamie Dimon agreed with the assessment. He said America has become less reliable. And then he pointed towards India's rising role on the world stage. He highlighted how leaders like Mark Carney are making an outreach to countries like India.
If you said to me, has America become unreliable? No. It's just you had total reliance, and now it's less reliable. We're causing some things that may not be good in the long run for America, like Carney was just in China, and now he's going to go to India. And,
So India's stock is rising, and that's what the Indian delegation in Davos is seeking to leverage. This year, 9 Indian states are participating in the World Economic Forum. Some of India's largest economic engines, states like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat and Maharashtra are present. These states drive India's economic growth. And pitching along with them are emerging states like Telangana, Assam and Jharkhand. In fact, Assam and Jharkhand are making their debut at Davos. And they're not there simply to observe. They're competing with the world's best. They're pitching solutions to global issues like rebuilding supply chains, ensuring energy security, expanding the value chain in the tech sector. They're assuring 3 things to investors: ease of doing business, a stable policy environment, and targeted reforms. Of course, the challenge would be to walk the talk, to deliver on these promises, but the timing could not have been better to sell the India story. Global investors are looking for new options. Supply chains are shifting, alliances are being redrawn, and India has positioned itself at the heart of this reset. So India has been shining at Davos, a beacon of hope amid all the political chaos. We are being praised for our reforms, for our adoption of technology and for our trade negotiations. Basically, it's been a good week at the World Economic Forum. But yesterday, there was also a reality check. It came during the session on India's economy. Former IMF chief economist Geeta Gopinath was on the panel. She was talking about the challenges to India's growth. All the usual suspects were named, like judicial reforms, land reforms, tariffs. But Geeta Gopinath also named another challenge, one that is probably bigger than tariffs: pollution.
Pollution is a challenge in India. And if you look at the impact of pollution on the Indian economy, it is far more consequential than any impact of any tariffs that have been put on India so far. If you look at the annual cost to India's GDP of the level of pollution that you have. And it's not just the effect on economic activity, but it's also the loss in lives.
I know it sounds jarring to hear. We see so much debate over the US tariffs, so much outrage and government clarifications, but not for pollution. And by the way, we checked out the numbers. A Lancet study found that air pollution costs us 9% of our GDP. 9%, that's healthcare expenses plus loss in productivity. The World Bank says the loss is between 5 to 6%. And what about tariffs? Most models suggest a hit of less than 1% because of tariffs. So what she said is true. Pollution is a bigger threat to our economy than tariffs. And tonight we won't talk about solutions. We won't talk about policies. We will talk about something much simpler and basic: acknowledgement. Why can't we acknowledge the problem of pollution? Why can't the government admit it? Because unless they do, they cannot solve it. And it's not for a lack of warnings. At this point, everyone is complaining about the pollution. Consider what happened last week. Delhi was hosting the Indian Open badminton tournament. But before it started, a Danish player pulled out because of pollution. He said the air quality was not suitable to play. He also posted a screenshot of the air quality index. It read 348. And that's not even the highest. The ideal is less than 100. This was 348. Last month, the AQI had touched 700 and 800. And this problem is not limited to Delhi. A cricket match was also affected in Lucknow. India was slated to play South Africa in December. Both teams arrived at the stadium, but a thick layer of smog covered the pitch. First, the toss was delayed by a few hours, and eventually the match was cancelled. It was called off. And it's not just sports. Last month, the top corporate boss quit his job in Delhi. He was president of finance at a listed pharma company, a company valued at almost 7,000 crore Indian rupees. Why did he quit? Because of air pollution. He said he could not live through another season of toxic air. And of course, the residents have been complaining for years. We've seen protests, we've seen lawsuits, we've seen online campaigns, but nothing seems to work. The government continues to be in denial. The focus is not on solving the issue, the focus is on hiding it. We have seen AQI numbers disappearing from government websites. We've seen water being sprinkled near AQI measurement sites, all in a bid to hide the problem. But this is the internet age. You cannot hide the reality anymore. Anyone with a smartphone can find out. Over 2 million deaths in India are attributed to air pollution. Imagine that, 2 million deaths every year. That's around 5,500 deaths every single day because of air pollution. And when it's not killing you, it's making you less productive. Look at this report from 2021. On high pollution days, your productivity drops by 8 to 10%. Put together, India loses 1.3 billion working days to air pollution, basically because employees cannot make it. So we are losing time, we are losing money, and we are losing efficiency. And these are three things that every investor looks at. So our message tonight is simple. Stop ignoring the problem. We spend months negotiating a trade deal to reduce US tariffs, but that's not even in our hands. It depends on how the Americans respond. But pollution, solving pollution is completely in our hands. We don't need foreign help for it. We don't need diplomatic negotiations. All we need is a political will to take on this challenge. If we don't, the impact will be felt long term. What's a headline today will become a stigma. Investors will hear India and they will think air pollution. Before it gets to that, we need to act. Donald Trump gathered world leaders in Davos today. This was for a signing ceremony for his latest project. It's called the Board of Peace, that's what he calls it. It is supposed to help rebuild Gaza after years of war. 19 countries have put their names on a charter. This charter formalizes the role of the board, but America's closest allies were missing from the ceremony. In fact, it would have been surprising had they attended, because just a day earlier, Trump had mocked all of them. He delivered a speech at the World Economic Forum and insulted and ridiculed countries and their leaders. Our next report has more.
Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do.
A new global body has been launched in Switzerland today. Not at the United Nations in Geneva, but at the World Economic Forum in Davos. There, U.S. President Donald Trump has unveiled what he calls the Board of Peace. A grand name for an ambitious project. It has started with Gaza. Trump says the board is designed to support the ceasefire there and to oversee the territory's reconstruction. To support this, he has invited several countries to join the board. That list includes allies and partners like India, but Trump says this is only the beginning. He says the Board of Peace could expand beyond Gaza and will work alongside the UN.
I think we can spread out to other things as we succeed with Gaza. We're going to be very successful in Gaza, and we can do other things. We can do numerous other things.
Trump launched the board with a public signing ceremony. He chaired it himself. Leaders and senior officials from 19 countries signed the founding charter with him. Some came as close political partners. Others joined as regional players with a direct stake in Gaza's future.
President Trump, the charter is now in full force, and the Board of Peace is now an official international organization.
But the ceremony also revealed who wasn't there. Major U.S. allies were conspicuously absent, and Trump's Davos speech a day earlier may explain why. In that address, he mocked allies and partners across the room. He first criticized Denmark while talking about his ambition of acquiring Greenland.
After the war, we gave Greenland back to Denmark. How stupid were we to do that? But we did it. But we gave it back. But how ungrateful are they now?
Then he mocked French President Emmanuel Macron. He mentioned the sunglasses Macron wore during his own Davos speech.
So when I called up Emmanuel Macron, I watched him yesterday with those beautiful sunglasses. What the hell happened? But I watched him sort of be tough.
Trump also singled out Canada. He said it benefited from the United States and that it should show more gratitude.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us.
He even targeted Switzerland, the host country, during his remarks, saying it was only good because of the United States. But perhaps his sharpest criticism was reserved for the war in Ukraine. Addressing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Trump told the Davos audience that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin would be stupid if they did not agree to a peace deal.
I believe they're at a point now where they can come together and get a deal done. And if they don't, they're stupid. That goes for both of them. And I know they're not stupid, but if they don't get this done, they are stupid. So I don't want to insult anyone, but you got to get this deal done.
So here's the paradox. Trump arrived in Davos with two messages: a new peace board on one hand and public jabs at allies on the other. He wants countries inside his new club, but he also used the Davos stage to ridicule the very allies he's courting. That's brand Trump for you, where not just foes, but even friends are fair game.
Our next story is about China and Africa. For years, Beijing has widened its footprint in Africa. It has built roads, ports and railways and given out billions of dollars in loans. But now there's a shift. While Chinese goods are flooding African markets, Chinese loans are drying up. Tonight, we'll try to decode this trend. Is Beijing rethinking its Africa strategy, or is this just a new chapter of the old playbook? Let us start with the numbers. Look at the export figures of last year. China's exports to Africa jumped to $225 billion, but Africa's exports to China were just $123 billion, meaning Africa is buying a lot more from China than it's selling it. And why have Chinese exports surged? Well, one reason is Donald Trump's tariffs. Last year, the US president slapped high tariffs on China. Beijing retaliated with its own tariffs on US goods. This led to a trade war, and these are the world's two biggest economies. Finally, they had a truce in October 2025. As of today, Chinese goods to America are taxed at 48%. And despite the truce, Chinese firms are under pressure. They don't want a repeat of last year. They don't like this uncertainty, so they're looking for other export markets. Enter Africa. It's a huge market with over 1.5 billion people. And it has a growing demand for manufactured goods, goods like consumer products and industrial equipment. Many African countries do not produce things locally or on a large scale. So China is filling that gap. And that's how exports are rising. But like I said, Chinese loans are also shrinking. For years, Beijing has been a major lender in the continent. A lot of countries figured out too late that this was a debt trap. And even when they did figure it out, they needed money for developmental projects. So they kept going back to the loan shark called China. For example, in 2016, China's lending to Africa peaked at nearly $29 billion. This was driven by Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. But by 2024, the picture had changed significantly. Chinese lending to African countries fell to $2.1 billion. This was the first annual decline since the Wuhan virus pandemic. So the question is, why is Beijing cutting back on lending? One factor is the growing risk. The pandemic put a lot of economic stress on African countries. Countries like Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia defaulted on loans. That meant a loss for lenders, including China. So now they are steering clear of expensive mega projects. They're turning to smaller ones, projects that are commercial, easier to finance, and easier to recover money from. Reports say China funded just 6 projects in Africa in 2024. So it's still funding projects. It's just being more selective. It is also shifting away from dollar-denominated loans. And this is important. China is increasingly giving loans in its own currency, the yuan. Look at Kenya, for example. All their Chinese infrastructure loans are now yuan denominated. In fact, Kenya has also converted a loan from dollar to yuan, a $3.5 billion loan from Beijing. Same with Ethiopia. It is considering shifting to yuan. And in Zambia, some taxes from Chinese companies are being collected in yuan. So Beijing is using loans to build leverage in more ways than one. China's game plan has 3 parts, you could say. Number 1, keep the trade growing. Number 2, reduce financial risk. And number 3, expand the role of the yuan. Put these 3 things together and you can see how Beijing is building long-term influence. Not just through big infrastructure, but increasingly through trade dependency and currency promotion. If there was ever a doubt that India's relationship with Bangladesh has hit rock bottom, today that doubt is gone. Bangladesh has refused to play cricket in India. India is hosting the T20 World Cup next month and the Bangladesh team won't play. They've refused to travel to India.
We are always in touch with our players. We have our own cricket board and our own ministry. Let me clearly state that the decision not to play the World Cup in India, considering security risks, is a decision taken by our government.
The decision was taken by Dhaka, by the interim regime of Mohammad Yunus. So it comes from the very top. And in case you've not followed, this standoff has been brewing for weeks now. Bangladesh started it by moving to the ICC, the International Cricket Council. It's the governing body for international cricket. Bangladesh was scheduled to play 4 matches in India. They asked the ICC to change that. They wanted to change the schedule and the venue at the last minute. They said their games should be moved from India to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a co-host of this tournament, so Bangladesh said they're comfortable playing there, in Sri Lanka. And what was the reason for the request? Dhaka cited team security. They said they have concerns over their team's safety in India. The ICC did not buy it. It found no credible security threat. So it rejected Bangladesh's request. A meeting was held yesterday, a meeting of the ICC board. This is the main decision-making body of the ICC. 16 members were present at this meeting. They met via video conferencing. They put Dhaka's request to a vote. Should Bangladesh be allowed to change venues? That was the question. 14 board members said no. Only 2 of them supported the idea, and no prizes for guessing which 2 members. Bangladesh and Pakistan. They were the only ones who backed the request to move the matches from India to Sri Lanka. Now, with 14 out of 16 rejecting it, the motion was defeated. Dhaka was given an ultimatum. They were given a 24-hour deadline to decide if they will play in India. If not, they will be replaced by Scotland. Today, Bangladesh came back with its answer, and it was a no. They won't play in India, even though the players are ready. They want to travel to India. Some of them were present in the meeting where the final call was taken. And it's not just Bangladeshi players who were present, by the way. Asif Nazrul was there. He is the sports advisor of Bangladesh. Also present was Aminul Islam, the president of the Bangladesh Cricket Board, and Nizamuddin Chaudhry, the board's chief executive. Reports say the players were ready to play in India, but the political bosses overruled them. Mohammad Yunus's sports advisor announced the decision himself. He confirmed that the government does not want the team to travel. Listen to what the chairman of the Bangladesh Cricket Board said.
এই সিচুয়েশনে In this situation, when we are seeing that Bangladesh may not be going to the World Cup or has been given an ultimatum, we will still try our best to play in the World Cup. At a time when the popularity of world cricket is declining, if a cricket-loving country like Bangladesh misses the World Cup, the ICC would be making a big mistake.
They say the ICC is making a mistake, but the ICC clearly feels differently. So what happens next? Bangladesh could be removed from the tournament and Scotland could step in. The ICC is yet to announce it. But regardless of what happens, this episode shows how much the relationship with India has soured. India and Bangladesh are now divided on the cricket pitch. But why is Dhaka going this far? It started with Mustafizur Rahman. He's a star Bangladeshi pacer. He was dropped from the IPL. His team, the Kolkata Knight Riders, released him. It was an isolated case in a domestic tournament of India, but the regime of Mohammad Yunus turned it into a national issue for Bangladesh. And since then, Dhaka has been fighting the ICC. But this is their loss, because this is a World Cup. It's a global tournament, and Dhaka's petty politics is hurting its own players. They trained for a tournament where they won't be able to play anymore. The game will go on with or without Bangladesh. And this is a country that's looking to turn a page. Today, campaigning began in Bangladesh for an election that's supposed to usher a new phase of democracy. But on the same day, their cricket team lost a battle to an unelected regime. And the biggest loss is for the fans, the people of Bangladesh who wanted to see their team play, but will now be left out. Our next story is about an emerging race in space. It's not about rockets or going to Mars. It's about something we use every day, the internet. Jeff Bezos' space company has just announced a big plan. The company is called Blue Origin. It wants to launch thousands of satellites into space to create a new communications network. Although this network will not be for regular people like you and me, it will be for big companies and governments. Blue Origin says the launch could begin in 2027. And here's the catch. This space is already very crowded. Elon Musk's Starlink already has thousands of satellites in orbit. Now Bezos is challenging him. Our next report tells you why.
Forget the moon. The next space race is about something far more valuable: control of the internet itself. And Jeff Bezos has just fired his opening shot. Blue Origin has announced it will launch over 5,400 satellites into orbit. It will build a communications network called TerraWave. But here's the twist. This isn't for streaming Netflix or scrolling social media. TerraWave is built for data centers, governments, and corporations moving information at industrial scale. Its launch date? Late 2027. And with this, Bezos is walking straight into a war zone. Because one man already owns this battlefield: Elon Musk. His internet service, Starlink, has already built an empire in the sky. It has around 10,000 satellites already circling the Earth, and more than 6 million customers in at least 140 countries. So why does TerraWave matter? Because Blue Origin says it will target a different kind of user. Not households, but high-capacity operations. TerraWave promises speeds up to 6 terabits per second anywhere on the planet. To put that in perspective, that's not internet for your laptop. That's the kind of bandwidth you need to move entire server farms worth of data. The kind of power that runs AI training, government operations, and global cloud infrastructure. And look at the timing. Right now, the space industry is obsessed with a radical new concept: data centers in orbit. The pitch is simple. AI needs massive computing power, and on Earth, that requires immense energy and infrastructure. Companies are now exploring whether space-based systems can take on some of that load. So TerraWave is not just about speed, it is about building the next layer of digital infrastructure. But this story also comes with a rivalry. Bezos and Musk have competed for years. Bezos started Blue Origin in 2000. Musk launched SpaceX 2 years later. In 2004, they even sat down for dinner to talk reusable rockets. But the relationship turned into a contest for contracts and prestige. In 2013, Blue Origin tried to block SpaceX from securing exclusive rights to NASA's Launch Complex 39A. SpaceX ultimately won. In 2014, the two clashed over a patent linked to sea landings of rockets. And in 2021, Blue Origin protested and sued NASA after SpaceX won a $2.9 billion lunar lander contract. Musk mocked the lawsuit publicly, and now the battlefield has shifted once again, from rockets to satellite networks. Musk has Starlink. Bezos has another satellite network already underway through Amazon. Amazon's satellite project, called LEO, has around 180 satellites in orbit so far, and it plans over 3,000 more in the orbit. But TerraWave is bigger than that, and it will focus on enterprise customers. Blue Origin says the network is designed for roughly 100,000 customers at most, and it will likely rely on Blue Origin's reusable New Glenn rocket to put the satellites into orbit. So this is not just a Bezos versus Musk story, it is a battle over who builds the next backbone of global connectivity.
Our next story is from Indonesia. It is Southeast Asia's biggest economy and home to over 280 million people. It's making news because of its currency, the rupiah. It dropped to a record low earlier this week, and this drop is being linked to the country's central bank, where the president's nephew now has a top role. So is this a case of political nepotism ruining the economy, or is there more to the rupiah's fall? Right now, the currency is close to 17,000 against the US dollar, meaning you need nearly 17,000 Indonesian rupiah to buy just $1 US. Like I said, it's a record low. What makes it even more peculiar is that the US dollar is also sliding. It's not like the dollar has suddenly become very strong. It's just the rupiah that has become weak because it is losing investor confidence. And there are two reasons for that. One is global pressure. Investors across the world are being cautious thanks to geopolitical tensions and uncertainties. And when investors are nervous, they reduce risk. They pull money out of investments that they consider risky. Emerging markets like Indonesia are often at the top of that list because such economies are more vulnerable to global shocks, so money flows out of them. In recent months, foreign investors have been selling Indonesian government bonds. In 2025, bonds worth $6.4 billion were sold. This has put pressure on the currency. The second reason is Indonesia's domestic policies. They do not inspire confidence. In 2025, the country's budget deficit was about 2.92% of its GDP. A budget deficit is when a government spends more than it earns. In Indonesia, there is a legal limit on how big that deficit can be. That limit is 3% of the GDP. Last year, their deficit came very close to this 3% limit, 2.92%. So investors became nervous about government borrowing. They pulled their money out, and that hit the currency. Then the president made an announcement. President Prabowo Subianto, he appointed his nephew to a top position at the Bank of Indonesia. That's Indonesia's central bank. Prabowo's nephew is already the country's deputy finance minister. Now he is also the deputy governor of the central bank. This move spooked markets and investors. They fear it could compromise the central bank's independence. You see, central banks are supposed to stay above politics. They set interest rates based on economic data and not political pressure. And that independence is very important because governments often want cheap money to fund their programs. But central banks have to think about inflation. They have to think about long-term financial health. So when markets see a president appointing a family member to the central bank, they're uncomfortable. They start asking questions. Will this person prioritize economic stability or political loyalty? And often markets do not wait for an answer to such questions, they just start selling. That's happening in Indonesia too. The government is trying to calm fears. It says the central bank will remain independent. It won't be under pressure to fund government programs. But investors are skeptical. And it does not bode well for the country's economy. A weaker rupiah means imports will cost more, repaying foreign debt will be more expensive, and inflation could rise. So is this a temporary shock? Or is this the beginning of a larger problem? Well, that depends on how disciplined the government is with its spending and how credible the central bank remains in the eyes of investors. Our next story is from Syria, where the country's new leadership is facing a major challenge. It controls most of the country, but not the northeastern region. For years, this region has been run by the Kurdish-led forces. They have their own local administration, and they control some of Syria's most important oil and gas fields. Now, the new government wants the northeast under its control. It says Syria must have one unified government. But the forces there are hesitant to hand over power. And the result is a deadly clash. In fact, deadly clashes that have erupted in northeast Syria. A ceasefire agreement has now been signed, but the situation is still quite tense. Here's a report.
Syria is on edge again. An old struggle is turning violent once more. The fight over who controls Syria is back on the front line. For more than a decade, one force held most of northeastern Syria. It is called the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF. The SDF is a Kurdish-led alliance formed in 2015 with U.S. support. It includes Kurdish and Arab fighters, and it became Washington's main partner on the ground against the Islamic State. That partnership helped defeat ISIS's territorial control by 2019. But it also left the SDF running a semi-autonomous region inside Syria, with its own administration, its own checkpoints, and control over key oil and farming areas. It also meant the SDF ended up guarding some of the most sensitive sites in Syria. Prisons and detention camps holding tens of thousands of people with suspected ISIS links. Now, that entire order is being challenged. Because Syria has a new leadership in Damascus. President Ahmed al-Sharaa is in power after Bashar al-Assad was toppled in late 2024. And he says the country must be unified again.
I call for the effective participation in building this country and maintaining its safety and unity and expel anything else.
That promise of unity has put him on a collision course with the Kurds, because Damascus wants one army and one chain of command. But the SDF has spent years building its own system in the northeast, so talks dragged on, deadlines passed. Then the dispute turned violent, when fighting broke out between Syrian government forces and the SDF. Government troops pushed into SDF-held areas. The SDF withdrew from much of its territory in response, and Damascus regained territory in a matter of days. It also took control of major oil and gas fields previously under the SDF's influence. Control of those resources is not symbolic. It is economic survival for a country trying to rebuild. But after days of fighting came a breakthrough, or at least an attempt at one. Last Sunday, al-Sharaa and the SDF commander signed a 14-point agreement. It called for the SDF's civilian and military structures to be integrated into the Syrian state.
It is a battle and a victory for all Syrians. God willing, it will be a good beginning for reconstruction, development, and rebuilding, and for Syria to put an end to the current state of division and move toward unity, progress, and leadership.
But even after that agreement, the ground reality did not fully change. Both sides reported further clashes. This comes at a time when the U.S. position is also shifting. Washington says the SDF's original purpose as the main anti-ISIS force has largely expired. Donald Trump believes that Damascus is now willing and positioned to take over security responsibilities, including ISIS detention facilities.
He's working very hard. The president of Syria is working very, very hard. Strong guy, tough guy, pretty rough resume.
But with tensions still high, Damascus announced a second ceasefire on Tuesday. It said the goal was to give time for consultations and to work out a more detailed plan for how the SDF's core Kurdish areas could be integrated under the broader agreement. This is now Syria's latest test. Can it reunify without tearing itself apart all over again?
Donald Trump is not a very deep thinker. He's very literal in what he says and does. And sometimes that can be a good thing. It helps you connect with ordinary voters, but sometimes it can backfire. Like it did yesterday at the World Economic Forum. Trump kept calling Greenland Iceland, and we can see why he made that mistake. Greenland, despite its name, is actually full of ice, and Iceland, despite its name, is quite green. And this was, in fact, a Viking marketing strategy. The Vikings wanted more people to visit Greenland and settle there. So to make it appealing, they called it Greenland. Centuries later, the strategy has claimed a victim, and that is Donald Trump. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Australia observes a national day of mourning for the victims of the Bondi Beach shooting. In Ukraine, wounded veterans turn to theatre for healing. And in Bangladesh, a massive fire rips through the Cox's Bazar Rohingya camp. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1973, the US Supreme Court delivered its Roe versus Wade verdict. The judges held that abortion was a legal right under the US Constitution. For decades, this ruling protected the freedom of choice in America. But in 2022, the same Supreme Court struck down the verdict, thus criminalizing abortion in several American states. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice. The conversations everyone is having and the ones they're avoiding. It's the same show, but this new year, Firstpost America gets a new look. I'm Kerry Johnston, and this is Firstpost America.